So we're going to start off with our Rowdy rankings on the 5 teams that we think had the best free agency. So, Rob, who do we think is number 1?
Number one, I think, is clearly the Atlanta Falcons. They went from being a joke last year to being a serious contender this year, and they did that all just by bringing in Kirk Cousins. Having a franchise quarterback like that who can win you regular season games, he hasn't proven himself in the playoffs yet, but he's got the talent for it. Having a guy like that under center changes, not just the outlook of your fans, but the outlook of your players, the confidence they have in themselves. I expect Kirk Cousins to single-handedly revive Kyle Pitt's career. He's done pretty much nothing since he got drafted, even though he had such high expectations. I think Kyle Pitts is going to be one of the best tight ends in football this year. He's going to, finally have a quarterback who knows how to throw him the ball. He hasn't had that his entire career. So I just expect the entire team to be transformed this year as opposed to last year. And, not only did they get Kirk, but they went out and they got pieces to put around him like Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore. They have a lot of speed, a lot of explosiveness on the wide receiver position now. I fully expect them to have a completely different team, a completely different outlook this year. And if that's what you do in free agency, you completely shift your team from, bottom of the barrel to contender. I think that deserves to be the number one free agency we had in the NFL this year.
Absolutely. And just to echo a little bit of that, like Darnell Mooney is a playmaker. What he was able to do in Chicago gets kind of overlooked because he's just been on bad teams. And I know that I have hope for Justin Fields and resurrecting his career in Pittsburgh, but he was not the best especially with a poor offensive line, with getting the ball even close to Darnell Mooney. And Mooney is just quick. He's just the way he can get separation. Um, it's definitely someone that the Falcons bringing in to add with Drake London, to add with Kyle Pitts, to add with, that whole offensive scheme, Rondale Moore, you're absolutely right. The Falcons literally went out there and they were like, you know what? How do we change our entire team to make it competitive? And they did it in free agency in a week. So they may have spent a lot of money to do it, but I think they're going to be greatly appreciative of the result. Because there's a lot of teams, and I'm sure we'll be getting into them when we get into our top 5 with our worst free agency. There are a lot of teams that had a lot of money, and the Falcons definitely spent theirs wisely. At number 2, we have my boys, the Tennessee Titans. I think the Titans absolutely went out and struck gold. This is probably one of the first times, especially looking back, where we have a competent general manager to go out and a competent coach, first of all, too, to really go out there and make a difference, to start making a difference in free agency. If you look at the past Tennessee Titans teams, there has not been much in free agency that has transpired, and it's gotten them into the hole that they found themselves in at the start of this kind of season, at the end of last season and moving into this one, where you have holes all over the place, players that want more money, but we're not going to give them because we can't really, we have too many other holes to look at, and what do we do? But the Tennessee Titans really went out there and they started to plug some of those holes. And, first and foremost, I know he probably wasn't the biggest name, but adding that center out of the Broncos, Lloyd Cushenberry, was big to start to restabilize that offensive line that has been so worrisome for the past number of years. And not only that, but just, I believe, and a lot of people believe, that the Titans have something really special in Will Levis. And especially with a quarterback like that you think could be that guy for the next number of years, could be that next Patrick Mahomes, could be that guy, you need to protect him. You can't just have him being hit and hurt, and all, because you'll end up like Andrew Luck, where Andrew Luck could have done great things for the Colts, but he's retiring early because he just hit too many times. He's injured, So that was a great addition. But not only did they start to kind of rework the offensive line, they went out and they got Tony Pollard, which was probably one of the bigger first names that they signed, which I know, Rob, you're probably pretty heartbroken over. I know there was a lot of speculation that the Cowboys and Titans were going to be doing a swap at running back, that they would get Derrick Henry and we would get Tony Pollard when the Tony Pollard news broke. But unfortunately for the Cowboys, they did nothing. And instead, Lamar Jackson is going to enjoy the king in Baltimore, which I am still a little mad and angry that he went to the Ravens, a team that I have deep dislike for. But regardless of that, he kind of fits what the Ravens want to do, where it's just kind of just bruising and running. So, obviously, I wish Derrick Henry the best, but bringing in a guy like Tony Pollard was really big for the Titans to kind of replace some of that hole at running back. And I think Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears, the rookie we drafted last year, is going to be a great dynamic duo. And so they restabilize that. And then they go out, and this is the one that I think shocked me the most in terms of free agency. And that was the acquisition of Calvin Ridley. And I kid you not, I literally like the top teams that were looking at him was, of course, Ben being re-signed to the Jaguars. There was talks that he could go to the Patriots, and I know Patriots fans were pretty happy, would have been pretty happy with him coming there. And honestly, I didn't think that the Titans were even on the radar for Calvin Ridley. And so when the news broke and I was at work and I got the notification on my watch and I looked at it and I was like, no way. No way that they literally went out. Like, this is unheard of. I know for some teams it might be like, okay, great, you went out and you signed a good wide receiver. But this like never happens for the Titans in terms of this period of the time of the year in football. That most of the times we're like the Cowboys, which did nothing. So I hate to keep saying that, but it's true. It's true. And the roles are reversed for the first time in a long time. And I'm as many Titans fans are, I am super stoked that Calvin Ridley is in. No, we did not overpay for him. Squandering that right now. He is going to be a top guy and a big guy that will be, doing things with DeAndre Hopkins, being that person who can walk in and start to make a difference in the wide receiver room. So the Titans are at number 2. And after all of that stuff, because not only did they fix their offensive line, they fixed the whole Derrick Henry absence with going to Baltimore and they brought in talent in the wide receiver room. There's definitely questions, defensive side of the ball. Hopefully we address that in the draft, and offensive line as well. There still needs some of that help. But I think the Titans absolutely swung big and got some great additions to help them compete in this division, which is heating up. The AFC South is not a joke anymore. A lot of great teams. And to stay competitive, you need some of these top names and top people. And I believe, like with the Falcons, they brought in the talent that they needed to make a difference, and they used their money wisely.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that they should be at number 2 because they completely switched their situation around from last year. Last year they were bottom of the barrel team, outlook wasn't great, picking top 10 in the draft, but they added the guys that they needed to. Starting with Calvin Ridley, I feel like he was way, way overpaid. I mean, I don't think he's $100 million or $95 million wide receiver, whatever amount he got paid. And I think if
92.
you 92. I think if you were going to spend that on a wide receiver, it probably should have been on 24-year-old AJ Brown, all pro AJ Brown, rather than, 30-year-old
I will address this.
Pro
Keep going. I will
Bowler
address.
one time Calvin Ridley. So that move kind of confused me, but at the same time, Calvin Ridley is a, legit wide receiver, maybe not a absolute stud like AJ Brown or CeeDee Lamb or someone like that, but he'll be a productive guy. Pairing him with D Hop and maybe a weapon in the draft and what's his name, Burks, Traylon
Traylon Burks.
Burks. Yeah. Uh, they should have a solid group of weapons this year for Will Levis to target. So that was definitely something that they really needed to address. They might have overpaid to do it, but that's just kind of what happens in free agency. The two most underrated pickups, I thought Pollard was a fantastic pickup for the Titans. He was bad to start last year, coming off of his injury. He did not look like his old self. But at the end of the season, he finally started to return to form. He forced like the most missed tackles in the league over that last stretch of games there. He was just turning into the old Tony Pollard before our eyes. He had his burst back and his agility, and it was really exciting to see that, which is why I kind of hope the Cowboys will retain him this year. Um, Having that Tony Pollard with the Titans will definitely be a change of pace for Will Levis and that organization because He doesn't have the power that King Henry does. He's not gonna absolutely truck people the way Derrick Henry does, but he's not weak either. He can still break tackles. He's got more speed, more burst, more acceleration, I think, than Derrick Henry had at this point in his career. So it'll be a change for the Titans, but I think it'll be a good one. I think he'll be a productive playmaker. And then I am so jealous of White Cushenberry going to the Titans. The Cowboys don't have a starting center on their roster right now. Um, I know people are saying it might be Brock Hoffman, but no, it's not Brock Hoffman. Um, Cushenberry is amazing. He had a great season last year, career year. He really is going to solidify that position. He's only 26. He'll be there for a long time playing at a high level. I really hope the Cowboys would get him to replace Tyler Biadasz going to the Commanders. But sadly, it did not happen for us. But I'm happy it happened for you guys. Great player that you got there. Definitely deserve to be at number 2. At number 3, we have. Oh, well, actually, you said you need to address the whole Calvin Ridley thing
Oh,
first.
I was just gonna say, one, Calvin Ridley said that he may be 29, but he's more like 25. So he said that in his interview. So we aren't getting a 29-year-old, we're getting a 25-year-old. So I just wanted to clear the air. It doesn't matter when he was born. We still have a young player. And the whole thing with AJ Brown, I've seen a bunch of that stuff too going around, and it's funny because like people are saying like, oh well, you weren't willing to pay AJ Brown this amount of money, but you're willing to pay Calvin Ridley this amount of money, and then people were trying to do side by sides. But it's like, okay, great, that's a great comparison. But what you're not talking about is we had a terrible GM who decided that with AJ Brown and decided to trade him away, and now we have a good GM. Two different situations, and Rand Carthon is trying his best as anybody in the Titans organization to rewrite that wrong. Because as soon as AJ Brown left, everyone knew it was a mistake. Everybody knew it was bad. And especially when Traylon Burks didn't shape out his first number of years. So the Titans have been looking for a guy to replace AJ Brown. And yes, side by side, maybe AJ Brown would have been better to retain younger wise. But hey, some of the controversy in the locker room with the Eagles seems to be a little bit of AJ Brown's fault. So we definitely don't want that in Tennessee. So maybe it was good that we offloaded him when we did. But still, yes, I know it seems ironic that we wouldn't pay AJ Brown that much, but we're paying Calvin Ridley that much. But it's this is a new GM. In Rand we trust, and let Rand cook is the words that we are living by right now.
Well, I really hope that whole thing works out for you, Carson. The whole Calvin Ridley quote you just talked about really reminded me of the Toby Keith song, Don't Let the Old Man In. How old would you be if you didn't know the
Yes.
day you were born? I guess Calvin Ridley's 25 if he didn't know
He's
the day.
25. He said it. He spoke it into existence. So he's reverted back to his younger self.
See, well, again, for the Titans' sake, I really hope he, plays that way. Doesn't gamble anymore and get suspended again. Think on that one.
Yes. Really hoping he's learned. He said he has. We'll see if he yeah. Really keeping my fingers crossed.
Okay. So
Back on
moving
track.
back,
Yeah.
number 3. Number 3 on our list, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Carson, how do you feel about that?
I agree. I think Pittsburgh Steelers are certainly a team that, as we will probably mention for the fourth team on our list too, which we'll get into soon enough. But I think the Pittsburgh Steelers really needed a quarterback. I don't think Kenny Pickett was shaping up to be what Pittsburgh wanted him to be. And I think going out and pretty much getting Russell Wilson for free was probably one of the best moves they could. Of course, I think at that time they were hoping that he'd come in and maybe he wouldn't be the starting quarterback, but he would be a mentor to Kenny Pickett. But of course, as things played out, Kenny Pickett's gone, and now they have Justin Fields. And I think out of those two quarterbacks with Russell Wilson or not Kenny Pickett, I'm sorry, Justin Fields, those two guys, you put them in this kind of format in how the Pittsburgh Steelers are built, and really the question mark came at quarterback. So having that quarterback now that has the efficiency as you know, whether it's Russell Wilson, whether it's Justin Fields, whatever that might be. I think that's great pickups, but especially on the defensive side of the ball, I think signing their divisional rivals, Patrick Queen from the Ravens, was also such a big boost to their. It's going to be disastrous defense in terms of having teams play against it. Because not only do you have TJ Watt on the line getting at your quarterback, but now you have Patrick Queen in that kind of secondary behind the line ish, and it's going to be a grinder for teams to get by both of those guys. Big playmakers, keeping especially in the Steelers kind of, I guess, format of how they play. Tough defense, but now they have their offensive problems. Should at least have them figured out with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields coming in to kind of help bolster that room. I think both of them are better than Kenny Pickett. So I think that there's only going to be success along those lines. So absolutely, I think the Steelers deserve this spot at number 3. I think they went out, they got some really key players. Of course, it's not a perfect team. Still, maybe some holes that they try to address in the draft. But still, that keeping to the Steelers' way of football, they went out and they got the guys they needed, especially as the situation evolved. Because I don't think anyone saw Kenny Pickett, blowing a gasket and wanting to leave and requesting a trade. So I think that certainly surprised the Steelers as well. So, but absolutely, I think the Steelers deserve number 3.
Yeah, I completely agree. They kind of remind me of the whole Viking situation where I feel like they had a really good roster. They just needed that quarterback to make it work. And they went from having, Kenny Pickett and Mason Rudolph as their 2 guys to having Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in the span of like a week, all for the cost of like a 6th round pick and $1 million. That's a huge upgrade. Justin Fields, in my opinion, has way more potential than either Kenny Pickett or Mason Rudolph. And obviously, Russell Wilson, proved that he's not the guy that he was in Seattle, but he's still a good quarterback. He's still, I think he was top 3 in the league in touchdown to interception ratio last year. He has much better talent around him in Pittsburgh than he would have had in Denver. He's got to be throwing the ball to Pickens and Freiermuth and Darnell Washington. Um, 3 really exciting young players. Now, the Steelers did trade away Deontay Johnson, so they really need a wide receiver too to step up. Maybe they'll address that in the draft. I imagine they will. But they have a great offensive line. They have a wide receiver number 1. They have great running backs. They have great tight ends. As you mentioned, they have TJ Watt and a really loaded defensive line. They got Queen at linebacker. At corner, they have Joey Porter Jr. At safety, they got Minka Fitzpatrick. That's a really good roster. That's a really good team. They have a great head coach in Mike Tomlin. 2 exciting quarterback prospects, one for the future, one for the present. The Steelers absolutely have changed their fate by upgrading that quarterback position. And I would not be surprised to see them make a serious playoff run this year.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, they can clearly compete with any of those teams in the division. Maybe, yeah, it's always tough because whenever the Steelers play the Ravens, one of those games, both teams don't look like they're supposed to look, and it just becomes a bloodbath. So I don't know. But I especially with the Bengals and the Browns, I think the Steelers team could even be better than both of them. And it's going to be super interesting to see how this the AFC North shapes up.
Yeah, absolutely. It is going to be a lot of fun. But I think the 4th team on our list is right up there with Pittsburgh. They're from the NFC North. I'm talking about the Minnesota Vikings. I know that might come as kind of like a shock to a lot of people since they lost Kirk Cousins, and that was their quarterback 1. They wanted to retain him, and they didn't, and now they have a huge hole at quarterback. But like we were talking about before, I think they kind of built a really good team that just only had a hole at quarterback. They got 2 really good edge rushers this year. I know they lost Danielle Hunter, but they got 2 guys that were younger than Danielle Hunter, on long-term deals there. They got Van Ginkel and they got Jonathan Greener from the Texans, both really good edge rushers. So now they have a really scary duo on the defensive line that'll be there for at least the next few years. They got what's his name, Cashman at middle linebacker to pair with Ivan Pace Jr. So they got a great duo there. They just built a really great roster. And not only did they do that, but they recognized they had a hole at quarterback and they went and they did something about it. They traded for that second first-round pick. So now they have the draft capital necessary to move up and get their quarterback in the future, probably with the 3rd overall pick. A guy like Drake May or Jaden Daniels. When you have your team going from again being like middle of the pack team last year, not really, having any sort of playoff aspirations to being in a position to have one of the better rosters in the entire league in one offseason, even if it's just by signing a couple edge rushers and linebackers and then letting your starting quarterback walk so you can trade up and get a new guy, a younger guy. To me, that is a fantastic way of running your team. I think the Vikings, like we talked about earlier, are going to be very competitive this year. And I think if they didn't have the free agency that they did, they wouldn't be competitive at all next year. So I was very happy to see them make the moves that they did. And I think they deserve to be at number 4.
Yeah. No, I mean that those are all fair points. And absolutely, if you look at it in the sense of like, the moves that this team made has set them up for a better future than some of these other teams. And so yep, Vikings at 4. Vikings at 4. At number 5, we have the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Eagles, as it may be a pain to Rob to admit, but they had also another fantastic free agency week, signing people, Bryce Huff, and other great defensive players, to really start to bolster this Eagles defense that struggled in the later half of the season last year. But I think the biggest name that they acquired was Saquon Barkley. And I know that Saquon Barkley is going to be a huge upgrade at running back for them, as last year they had DeAndre Swift. And I know that there was some limitations with Swift. Bringing Barkley in, I think, is going to change a lot of those things, and really make them a competitive team. I think, as I mentioned earlier, that this Eagles team, I think, really set out in free agency to start proving people wrong and what they were saying about, like, oh my goodness, this team fell apart. Like, how can you go 10-1 and just lose the rest of your games? Um, I think that the Eagles really wanted to go out and show people that, you know what, despite our setbacks, we're going to go out and we're going to even build a stronger team. And we're going to come right back at you and we're going to start, the whole process back to, we're going to be that guy. We're going to be that team. We're going to go to the playoffs. We're going to try to make that Super Bowl run. And adding some of these top players, especially Saquon Barkley on the offense, I think clearly solidifies them to be the number 5 team.
Yeah, the reason I think I have the Eagles at number 5, I don't necessarily agree with all the players they got. Like I think Saquon Barkley might not be as great as people think he is. I think he might have been regressing a little bit at the end of the Giants year last year. I don't think Devin White's that good. I'm pretty sure he got benched for some like rookie last year in Tampa Bay. But the reason I think they deserve to be at number 5 is because of the philosophy they had throughout free agency. They had weaknesses and holes in their team that they needed to fill, and they went out and got some of the best players available at those positions. That's a really aggressive way of doing things. That's a really good way of doing things. Most NFL teams don't operate like that. As much as it pains me to say this, it's like I'm swallowing acid right now. But that is probably the best way you could go about, free agency is going out and getting guys who fill those holes, that were very blatantly obvious on your team last season. The best guys available to do it. It's a way. Oh man, God, this sucks. It's an approach I admire. Okay, I think it's something that sets the Eagles apart from every other team in terms of how aggressive they are in trying to fill the needs they have on their roster. Like you said, they had a needed running back, so they got the best running back available, Saquon Barkley. They had a needed safety, so they got arguably, I'd say Xavier McKinney was a little better, but they got one of the best safeties available, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. They had a needed edge rusher, so they got the guy with one of the highest pass rush win rates over the past 3 years of Bryce Huff. It's just they had a hole on their roster. They went out and got one of the top guys available to fill it. I think every team wishes they could do that, but they don't. They can't, and they don't for some reason that is unavailable to me. I just the Eagles. God, this is bad. But the Eagles were fantastic at addressing their holes, even if, like I said, I don't necessarily agree with all of the guys they got. Because, like I said, Saquon and Devin White, I'm not exactly very high on the two of them, but maybe they'll prove me wrong this season. Although I really hope they don't.
Yeah. Well, I think in addition to those That is our top 5 in terms of teams that we think have the best free agency. I know that certain teams that didn't necessarily make our top 5 that I think deserve honorable mentions is the Green Bay Packers with Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney. Those 2 signings certainly helped a lot of holes on their roster as well. As is, it pains me to say this, but as well as the Houston Texans, they really made and built a scary defense. Aziz Al-Shaair, adding him, Danielle Hunter from the Vikings, and also taking Danico Autry from the Titans. That defensive line and linebackers, and oh my goodness, they've built themselves a killer defense. So those are my 2 honorable mentions to this list as well. Thank you for joining us on the Redzone Rodeo podcast.
If you like football and you like having fun, come on down and subscribe and check out our channel for more videos like this one.
No ifs, ands, or buts. This is the best place for your football news.